Hey everyone, it's Scott Keys from Wildlife Inspired, and today I've got a sensational guest. I think you guys are going to love this. Now, typically I start with an intro to the show, but do not fast forward this. Do not skip ahead. I want you to give this a minute and really watch and listen to the intro. This intro is going to be different than the one that's normally played. And after we get back from the intro, I'll introduce our special guest today, and I think you're going to love this one. So here we go. Pay attention. Wow. So I got to tell you, so I'm here with and on the screen now with Mary Anne Karren, who is the creator of that video that you just watched. And Mary Anne, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott.
So one of the reasons, so I watched this video and Mary Ann shared this on Instagram about maybe a month or two ago, it seems like, and I was like, wow, it was an amazing message, very thought provoking, visually very impressive, and it inspired me to look into this a little bit. So I'm not going to share what I've learned because I've got somebody who I do want to share a little or talk to a little bit about this video for. Um, but we're going to have a little bit of conservation message tonight. Not a whole lot because it is a photography based show and I have all these beautiful images that I also want to share of yours. What led you to creating this really impressive video about the Great Salt Lake?
So the reason I got into it was because I was out photographing at the Great Salt Lake and sort of realized as I spent more and more time there that it was a really special and unique place. And I was getting into birding and I was like, wow, this is an incredible resource that I didn't even know was here. And then within a couple of months of that, I realized, wow, it's actually disappearing. Like I've just learned of all of the birds that are here and all of the, the incredible ecosystem and the volume of birds that the Great Salt Lake supports, and it's drying up. And so I decided to spend as much time as possible at the Great Salt Lake, over the next few months or the next year, as long as it might last, so that I could capture a little bit of it. And then I wanted to share because I felt like most people were like me. They didn't really understand what was there. They were unaware, and I wanted to spread awareness about the lake. So that was why I started doing this.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and I think it's like this with so many things. Even locally, we don't always know what's happening because we're kind of dialed into our own lives and we're dialed into these other things, and we don't, and a lot of people don't care. I mean, a lot of people honestly just aren't invested in the environment or what's happening with our habitats or habitat loss. And once you start to research it or dig in a little bit different. And I've done the same, not with this topic, but with like native plants, where I have kind of a passion around that. It gets a little scary. And I mean, is it the same for you with this project where it's kind of like a little scary when you look at what's going on?
It really is. So I live on the doorstep of the Great Salt Lake. I can see it out my window, right? And I've always gone there and thought that it was a beautiful and wonderful place, but I really didn't understand how important it was just of an ecosystem in the American West for birds. And so once I started digging into it, I was like, wow, this is totally incredible. And why are we doing this? And why are we doing this? Why is half of the lake already dead? Why, I couldn't quite understand how we got to the place where we are. And it was exactly as you said, Scott, like really frightening to think about the history that led to where we are at. And essentially it's a history of just people don't understand, people don't know. So that was why I decided to take on this project. And then I want to give a quick plug. When I started trying to spread a conservation message through Instagram. This is not something that I had ever really done before. So I didn't know how to do it. And so I joined Jaymi Heimbuch's Wild Ideas Lab, and she has some member challenges. And the video was one of the member challenges. So I just want to give her a quick plug that thank you for pushing me forward to actually go into video. And of course, I never take video, so I had to use stills. so, so that's why I did it all with stills, because I don't actually have any video. Maybe at some point I will.
And I will say, anybody interested in conservation photography or work like you just saw, Jamie's been on the show. I can link cards up here after the fact, but I'll put a card up here to the video or the episode we had done, a live episode with her where we talked about conservation photography, and she's a wonderful human. So for sure, if you're into that sort of messaging or have a curiosity about it, I will put those links for Jaymi down here as well. So in the video today, you'll get, or in the description to the video today, you're going to get some information. Actually, let me switch over. And I'll just kind of show, this is Mary Ann's Instagram feed. So I'm going to scroll through quickly so you can kind of get a feel for the vibe of her content. Now, while this video caught my attention, I'll be honest, I've had you as a guest in the back of my mind for a while. This just kind of sealed the deal. So when I saw the video, I'm like, all right, that's it, we're done. Like she's got to come on the show. I was hoping you would say yes. I was fearful that you would say no. But really great use. And you're going to see this in the 10 images part that we get to in just a minute. You're going to see a very different style of photography in some cases, and how it all ties into that message. I think one of the things that you've done so well is capture the spirit of where you live. And I don't think everybody always does that. So just a lot of credit to you for your ability to really encapsulate what Utah is, and really what the backbone of that area is the Great Salt Lake. So really great job. So I'm just kind of scrolling through here. I also want to pull up your website. So you also have a website here that's pretty newly launched, I think, right?
Yeah, so after I started putting all these photos out and all of this information and, talking up the Great Salt Lake a lot, people were asking me, well, gosh, what can I do? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I was just spreading awareness. I really don't know what you can do. So I spent a bunch of time sort of looking into what are the action items, and I compiled them onto a web page, and you can go take a look at those if you're interested in helping out. So there's a few really simple, really easy things that I think you can do that will make a difference.
I've got one up now. Here's I don't want to say scary thing. The incredible thing is this isn't even one of your 10 images. And this is one of my favorites of yours. So I did want to pull it up. It is an amazing image. And I really love this panoramic style where there's just a hint of wildlife in a landscape photography. And you did an amazing job with this one.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like this one too. This is obviously not a great, Instagram photo, just because
Yep.
it's, the grebes, they're there. They really are, but they're tiny. But yeah, this is the kind of scene that I absolutely love. This is my favorite kind of scene at the Great Salt Lake. You've got these huge alpine mountains in the background. You've got this vast, lake that's forms, just a perfect mirror. And then, the birds, of course, the best part.
Really great stuff. Before we get into your 10 images real quickly, do you do this as a full-time? You do not, from what I understand. This is not your full-time profession.
No.
Okay. And anything, because I'll get into these images and I'll just start going crazy over the image and content. Anything you want to share about yourself, personally, kind of, we know you live in Utah and Great Salt Lake. Hopefully everybody knows that, but there might be some people watching in other countries that don't know where that's from. So in Utah, what else about you? What do you do for fun outside of photography?
Well, right now, photography is my main hobby, right? But I do have a long list of other hobbies that I have done throughout the years. Until just recently, I was employed in scientific research. So I was a program development specialist, writing grants and growing the research program in a computational genomics group that designed software for analyzing genomic big data. And then I quit my job. And so now I get to focus almost, I'm kind of considering the photography and this little conservation project that I'm doing. I'm kind of considering this my job right now. I have a family, so, I don't get to do it all the time. Um, but yeah, from taking a few months off. So this is basically what I'm doing right now. I'm not monetizing it in any way at this point. I haven't got any plans to do that. It's purely um, on an amateur and a volunteer hobby basis.
And just a scary fact that I know the answer to, but I wanted to ask you, how long have you been doing serious photography?
I started with the pandemic, so I was looking for. Well, I had plans to go to Belize, and that was in March of 2020, and that was, of course, canceled. And when I was still planning on going to Belize, I had been thinking, gosh, it'd be fun to take photos of all the wildlife that we're going to see, but I didn't really know where to start. And I started, Googling, like, what kind of camera should I take to Belize, right? and uh, and then I quickly realized, like, oh yeah, well, that's not, this is bigger than maybe what I thought. But then it was canceled, and I was like, well, I have a little extra money. I'm going to buy that telephoto lens, and I had a DSLR, um, just an older DSLR that had been gifted to me by a friend, and so I bought a 70 to 200 lens and started, taking pictures of feeder birds and that sort of thing. So March of 2020 is when I started. I would say that I got a significant boost when I got a real telephoto lens, like a long lens. And
Hmm.
that was when things really started to click for me.
Yeah, before I pull this up, I was kind of curious. So a lot of people are going to hear, so you're telling me this person never did photography before March 2020, and it is now November 2021. So basically, let's say a year and a half. And that's from the time you really picked up a camera and learned. And now you're doing this. So is there
So,
a, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I wouldn't say I never picked up a camera.
Okay.
I did have, for a couple years, maybe 10 years ago, I had a jewelry business. And so I had that DSLR to
Okay.
take photos of my jewelry to post online. So I did learn a lot about the importance of isolating your subject and
Okay.
distance from the background. And, I learned a lot about perspective
Okay.
and composition from that. But I just used auto. I didn't understand, the exposure triangle or anything like that. So I
And you
got
didn't
serious, and I kind of hated it, actually.
and you didn't know birds or you didn't know wildlife really at that point. I mean, you may have obviously we know what we know casually, but you weren't serious about wildlife at that point.
No.
Yeah, pretty incredible. Is there a shortcut for you? So if somebody's listening and saying, "Okay, how did she get so good so fast?" Is are there shortcuts out there, or was there an aha moment after 6 months or 12 months? Like when did it start to click for you in terms of a timeline?
I think it probably started to click for me again. The first photos that I got that really encapsulated what I wanted to do were when I got a 1:400 zoom lens. So I got, a longer lens, and I was able to maybe, and that was in about June of 2020. So I quickly graduated from the 70 to 200 to a 1:400, um, but again, from the jewelry experience, I had a look that I knew I liked. So I knew I wanted to create art, and I had a pretty good sense of what I wanted to look like. And so I would say, if you're looking for a shortcut, I mean, if people are, if you ask, like, what's the secret? It's sort of just to take it incredibly seriously. And I think that there are a lot of different things that you want to do in order to take it seriously. So I started sharing on Instagram, and I started following a lot of photographers, and really, paying attention to what I like and what I would like to do. Um, and then taking feedback very, very seriously. I got a mentor right away. So I've been working with Ray Hennessy for about a year. I bought the best equipment that I could afford. And when I had a job, I could actually afford equipment. Now I'm kind of like stuck with what I got. But, for a while, I actually had a job. And so, yeah, get the best equipment that you can afford. And that doesn't mean the most expensive equipment. I think it's really important for people to realize, don't buy a bunch of equipment before you really know what you want or what will work for you, because the best isn't necessarily the most expensive. And then just do it as much as possible. I mean, I take so many photos. I take so many photos of really bad things that will never see the light of day. Like, I take photos kind of constantly. And I'm constantly looking through them and trying to understand why things worked and didn't work. So that's what I've done.
So, is it fair to describe yourself as self-critical?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful with that. You do have to be very critical, and you have to have, um, you have to have a very discerning eye, and don't take yourself too seriously. But at the same time, you have to be, as a beginner at anything, I think you really have to be proud of what you can produce at your skill level in order to want to keep going. So I think it's really important to be really proud when you hit, a milestone, or you get a shot that you really wanted, even if it's, this is not maybe competition quality, or maybe in a year you will laugh that, it was so important to you. But I do think that for a beginner to continue, um, yeah, you have to be self-critical, but you still have to love the simple things that you make, and the progress that you make. So yeah, be proud of what you can do. Just compare to what you were doing a month ago, and be really, really pleased with yourself, and then go out and try and top it, right?
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about being self-critical and realistic. And I did this concept on Instagram. I spent a month kind of focused on Instagram as it relates to wildlife photography, and a ton of interesting feedback. And I don't want to get off on a tangent, but this concept of being self-critical can be a double-edged sword. It can drive you to be better, and it can also put a lot of pressure on yourself. At the end of the day, why am I doing this? And there's a lot of people that are putting an enormous amount of pressure on themselves simply to post images on social media. It's not their livelihood, it's not their well-being, and they're comparing themselves to photographers who may be doing it full time, or just have a tremendous amount of ability to spend time in the field and may have unlimited resources at their disposal. And that self-critical part can be very dangerous in some ways. So yeah, I think it's a powerful motivator for me, because I'm very self-critical, and I look at myself every day, and I just want to keep making better images. The same way I want to make a better YouTube channel, and the same way I want to design a better whatever. I just want to be better at everything. But it can be a weight on you sometimes. All right, let me pull up. Let me switch this layout real quick. All right, here we go. So we're gonna start. We're gonna jump into these 10 images. So tell us a little bit about each of the images as we go through. If there was anything unique or different, or if there's a story behind it, if it took a lot of time to set this up, or if you finally got that shot you wanted. So hard to recognize the species of waterfowl here. So do you know the species off the top of your head? Do you remember?
I think it's a shoveler, but I'm not totally sure. A
Looks it.
northern shoveler.
Yeah, could
Yeah.
be. Looks it.
It's
Yep.
very small.
Yep. It's
Yeah.
very small.
There were a lot of shovelers there that day. So it's a logical, but there were also a lot of green winged teal as well. So it could be either, but I think it's a shoveler.
And why did you choose this image as one of the images you wanted to show tonight?
This one was, I think this is just sort of the importance of continuing to experiment. So after taking photographs at the Great Salt Lake for about a year, I was basically decided, well, sunsets are better. I mean, sunsets are just a lot more consistent. You get better colors. You get the sun all the way down to the horizon. On the east, you've got these really tall mountains that sort of block the early morning sun. So by the time it actually crests over the mountains, it's all blown out, and so it's a really long blue hour and no golden light. So I had kind of given up on mornings, and then I started going out again in the mornings. Actually, Ray Hennessy came to town. We went out in the mornings, and I was like, all right, I should do this. The other reason I don't go out in the mornings is because all summer long the park only opens at 6, so it's too late. And then as fall comes along, you can get out there before sunrise. And get in position. And so I had been going out there and getting kind of the same sort of meh sunrises. And then this happened, right? We had this morning that was just a little bit post-frontal. It was absolutely glassy. There was all this mist and fog in the air, and there were these low clouds over the lake. And as the sun peaked over the mountains, it created all of these rays, which are the diagonal lines that you can see heading into the duck. And then it's illuminating these clouds that are then reflecting down on the lake. And it turned out to be like the most phenomenal light and spectacular morning that I had, or session that I had there. I mean, all the birds unfortunately were like a million miles away, so I did what I could, but it was just a good reminder to me not to get not to think that you know a place too well, to continue to experiment and to continue to have an open mind as far as what you're going to try.
Yeah, and a couple things came to mind. In it's kind of your style, I would say. If you've, everybody you don't pigeonhole somebody into one style, but you're going to see this theme of light and mood and environment. And also a great reminder to people who think, I can't get close enough to the birds, therefore I can't be a good wildlife photographer. A great example, and you're going to see many of these. I'm going to actually go to the next one, where these are not in your face birds. Like what's great is I always talk about the importance of light in photography. It really is, to me, it's the alpha and the omega. It's where everything should start and finish, and everything else in between you can probably make work. But with great light, you have a very high success ratio. Here's a great example of an atmosphere. You know how atmosphere shapes light and creates light. So is this a sunrise or a sunset image?
This is the same day, so
Okay.
two photos from the same day. This was just a little farther on, where instead of seeing the blues of the shade of the mountain, now you're sort of more in the golden light as it's coming up over the mountains, and it's filtered by all of this mist and haze, so it's turned golden. Um, yeah, just to comment on the small thing, I love up close, tight portraits, but I'm pretty new and I don't get that close to birds very often, so I just have to kind of take the shots that I can get. And if I'm out there, I'm going to be taking shots. If there's a bird anywhere in sight, I'm going to try, right? I'm going to try to make something of it. And so, um, turns out that some of my very favorite ones are really, really small.
Yeah.
But it's not that I have anything against or purposefully try not to um, shoot birds up close.
Yeah. Again, it's just a great reminder that atmosphere, I mean, look at this. Atmosphere, color, mood, can create these incredible images that are not what we typically, I mean, if you said somebody, what do you think of when you think of bird photography? A lot of them think of I hate the term bird on a stick, but a lot of people use that term where it's like kind of a close portrait, bird on a stick, and that's what bird photography is. And I think one of the things your 10 images here have a very different feel. I don't know how many guests I've had on, 20 or 30, has a much different feel than most, if not everyone else's images, because there's a consistency in this theme about atmosphere and light. Now, this image looks like it could possibly be a blue hour shot, so probably before or after sunrise or sunset.
Yeah, this is sunset, after sunset, well after sunset. So this was, I had been on, if you've been to the Great Salt Lake, there's an island in the middle called Antelope Island. I had been there and I was photographing burrowing owls. And of course, you know, um, the sun goes down and the ground sort of just sucks up all the light. And at some point you're done. And I was done photographing the owls and I was driving home. And as you're driving home, you drive across this long causeway with the lake on either side of the causeway. And there's something about the Great Salt Lake that sort of amplifies light. I don't know if it's the salt water, like if it's got a greater reflectivity index or something. I don't know, but you can be out there really, really late and have enough light. And so you can finish up, doing what you're doing and then drive out to the causeway and still have another half an hour of light, enough light to work with. It just really magnifies it. So I was driving home and I was tired and I was done. And then I spotted these 6 ducks coming in and the light was just getting better and better and better. It was just like having him, it was just going off. So I saw these ducks. I was like, oh, I have to stop. And so I don't know if anyone's ever photographed out there, but it's just like muck and mud and it smells really bad. But I saw these ducks coming in and I was just jumped out of my car, crept down the bank, laid down in the mud, just got all in it. and they came right by. And this is sort of the moment when they saw me and they were like, what's going on?
Hmm.
And so they kind of stopped and they paused and they sort of milled around for a few minutes and looked at each other like, what do we do? What do we do about the lump on the shore? And then happily they just sort of proceeded on their way. And I got a few good shots out of it. But this is one of my very favorite things, which is that the Great Salt Lake is so large that it really is truly without a horizon. And so when you can capture these birds in beautiful light with perfect reflections and no wind and get that no horizon, I just love the way it's a little bit trippy. It's a little bit
Hmm.
different and I love it.
Yeah,
I
really,
love that
really
it's
wonderful.
different.
It's funny because I could see people as you're talking about laying down in the mud. I could see people watching the show or listening on replay going like, "Yep, yep, I know what that's about," because it is a nasty when you shoot like in that muddy, either low tide water or just the edge of a shoreline that's really nasty. It is some funky stuff sometimes. One thing I want to ask you is because I'm looking at all of these images, including this really gorgeous. I mean, look at the light on this thing, but this really gorgeous images. Your perspective is very low. Are you typically shooting all of these water scenes on a tripod that is at its lowest position, or do you use like ground pods or hand holding or any other tips or tricks around that one?
I usually lay it on my arm.
Okay.
So I'm either laying the camera on the ground and sort of like lifting up the lens with my hand, or I'm laying sideways and I've got the camera on my arm and I'm doing this with it.
Okay. Do you shoot
That's
just
usually
because
what I do.
a couple people are asking, do you use a full frame? I mentioned that most of these images are at 500 millimeters. Do you shoot a specific body all the time, or do you have a couple bodies that you use? And is it a full frame or crop?
It's a full frame. It's a Canon R6, so it's their mirrorless. They've got the R5 and the R6, and the R6 is it's the lower, it's the 20 megapixel.
Okay.
It's a little bit faster. It's maybe better, a little tiny bit better in low light.
Okay. And you said you originally were shooting DSLR. So when did you make that switch to mirrorless? And do you have any challenges? Because people are fascinated that don't have mirrorless cameras. They want to know, like, should I do it? Is it a game changer? What are the advantages, disadvantages? I don't want to get into a huge discussion, but have you found it to be helpful in wildlife photography, or are there some things about mirrorless that you don't like?
Well, I don't think I have enough experience with the DSLR to really say that it's better for me
Okay.
than a DSLR. I wanted a new camera because I was working with kind of an older DSLR, and I felt like mirrorless was probably the way of the future, and so I was going to get a mirrorless when I got a new camera. Um, but the things that I love about it are the silent shutter. Like, I shoot with the silent shutter all the time. I don't care about artifacts. Like, I'll take it. I like the silent shutter. Um, I'll take a few artifacts here and there. And the R6 isn't too bad with the artifacts, although I have seen some.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I like the mirrorless. I think I wouldn't go back. I love, I never really had to do exposure compensation because I just look at the histogram and
Hmm.
I look at my digital screen, and I try not to blow out the highlights, and that's really how I operate. So I think it simplifies a lot of things. And so as you're learning, I think the simpler it can be, the better, right?
Awesome.
But
Now,
really, it's the
go ahead.
silent shutter and the 20 frames per second that I really
Yeah,
like.
yeah. And for what you're doing along the edge of shorelines a lot, silent shutter's a big deal. Like I did a video on DSLR versus mirrorless at Nikon at that time, and they still are well behind the curve. Hopefully, the Z9 launch for Nikon will be impressive. But I use my DSLR still for everything except waterfowl. So when I'm at the edge of the water, and you know how skittish those ducks are. As soon as there's a
Yeah.
sound or movement, and they don't always flush out of the water, but they just want to turn their back to you and drift over all the way to the other side of the lake. So yeah, I have found so I always use a mirrorless in those situations. So I'm gonna go through the next image here because this one's different than all of the others. So tell me a little bit about this one. What is the light source for this? Where was it taken in the same area, or is this one of the like a backyard type situation? What was this about?
So this is at the Great Salt Lake. So I picked all the pictures that I chose for tonight were from the Great Salt Lake,
Okay.
because I wanted to talk about that. So I do shoot elsewhere, but they're all from the Great Salt Lake or the surrounding wetlands. I count that as part of the Great Salt Lake
Hmm.
ecosystem, right? So this is a wetland that's on the shores of the Great Salt Lake. It's been restored by the Nature Conservancy with a bunch of native plants, and it's just a beautiful area. And there's a boardwalk going through some cattails, and they've got some, I don't even know what they are exactly. They look almost like an Indian paintbrush, but they're marshy growing
Okay.
flowers, red flowers. And so I had been there last year, and I knew that there was a window of like 2 weeks in August when a couple of species of hummingbirds were coming through. And of course, all summer long, we had terrible wildfire smoke, which really is a bummer if you want to take photos of ducks that are, a couple hundred yards away. It doesn't work. Like, the air quality is terrible. And so I thought, oh, well, we have wildfire smoke, and it's not so thick that the sun is going to disappear, but it's thick enough that it will turn to a great bright red. And I know this place where there should be hummingbirds, and I'll get the sun right on the horizon. And so this was like the only time in my life when I went out with a plan and then I executed it. I got the shot.
So that's
And
the sun.
actually, I thought that's the sun. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Maybe I'll get a hummingbird in the sun. That would be awesome, right? Like, I figured they'd be really far away because, so I had like my extender on. I had my 500 millimeter lens and my extender on,
Hmm.
and then this little guy was just so friendly and really close to the boardwalk. So I'm sitting on the boardwalk, and the cattails are at eye level as I'm sitting there, and I realized like I'm too close. Like the sun is just, it's not fitting in the frame, and so how fast the sun's going down, and I'm like trying to get the extender off so I can, hopefully this bird will come back while before the sun's gone, and I can get this nice shot. And I got a couple frames, so it was really fun. But I felt like, wow, I had a vision. I went out, I did it.
Yeah. The
Very
smoke.
satisfying.
Yeah, the smoke is like this horrendous event. Like you know where it's coming from. On the other side, I will
Yeah.
tell you that I know some people out on the West Coast that have gotten some really neat images like this in that smoke because it really does cut down the atmosphere. We had a really odd event, I think it was last year, where that West Coast those West Coast fires reached the East Coast. And I went out one morning and I couldn't figure out the light was so weird and it was so filtered, but I couldn't figure out why. And then when I got home, I hadn't listened really to the news, but they showed a map of the West Coast fires and how they were actually into Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So it was pretty
Yeah.
weird, but it did explain the light. But really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have a
Well,
plan
most
and it
days,
works.
yeah, sometimes you do, and hopefully that'll become more, common for me. I don't know. But with the smoke, man, there were just a few days like at the edges before it would get bad when you'd actually get the red sun, and then it's just blotted out, like you can't see it at all. So, um, and then there's really not a good, there's a few days when the smoke is just right, when it does give you atmosphere and it gives you, kind of a cool aura, but most of the time it just is horrible.
Yeah. All right. Let me pop this.
Anyway, this was one of the good days,
Yeah. Now this
better
one's a little
days.
bit different. So we saw a couple of your smaller in frame, really atmospheric. Now we're getting one that looks like he is coming up at you. So is this a unusual event for you or is this kind of typical? And what was it about this image that you love so much?
Well, I just think it's a nice portrait of an
Hmm.
avocet, and I don't have too many, so I thought I'd throw it in. It was a really fun day because I had spent the whole day out. It was one of those days when I was like, I have the whole day, so I'm going to go from place to place. And um, I had an incredible morning, and then I showed up here, and we had these like stormy skies. And this is the avocet's lit with some, the sun's just peeking out from under a cloud, and it's super dramatic lighting. And I had just laid down right here in this muck, and they just walked up toward me, and I got some nice frames. So
Nice.
it was a fun session with
Yeah.
the
I
avocets.
everybody should every bird photographer should shoot avocets because they are so fun to watch. And if you're on the edge of the water or wherever they're feeding and you're just super, super still and they're comfortable with you, they'll literally sometimes walk right past you or walk right up to you. But they're so busy feeding all the time. They just swoop, and it's great to just watch the way they work as a flock sometimes, just back and forth, sweeping their bills through that little thin patch of water there. I love avocets. I love shooting them. We don't get a ton of them here on the East Coast, so when I've gone down to Texas and Arizona, I had a nice morning with them one time. So when you go down south, I think you get them a little bit more. Up north, they're here, but they're tough. We don't get a chance to work with them, and we don't get a chance to work with them in these mud flats like that. So you're lucky. And I think avocets
We
are
have a ton
huge
of them.
there. I was going to say I think there are huge populations of avocet in the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah. Yeah, we have. I mean, you'll have flocks of many thousands, and they're there for a long time. So some of them nest, some of them go further north, but they do nest not on the lake itself, but in the surrounding wetlands, and they feed on those brine shrimp. And there are many thousands of them for starting in I don't know, maybe April, and they're still there. They're tailing off, but they're still there now. So beautiful, beautiful birds.
Yeah,
This was in May with the breeding colors. That orange head is nice. It's a fun one to have.
beautiful. Yeah, I love shorebirds in general. I've not shot shorebirds lately. I looked at the other day, just to realize the last time I shot shorebirds, it was a long time ago. So I definitely need to get back out. Now this one's totally different than everything else you have, and there's got to be a fun
Yeah,
story around this. Like this is just crazy.
yeah. So this is like my dream shot. So I just have to say that I was not planning on getting this shot, but this is something that I had in mind ever since I saw this behavior. So what this is they are brine flies, and they hatch by the billions in the lake. So the larvae are growing in the lake and feeding in the lake, and then they hatch and they float up to the surface of the lake, and then they wash ashore in these huge rafts. And so you'll have just these waves of mats of 2 or 3 inches thick of brine flies on the surface, and they're just kind of sitting there, and they settle down, and then the gulls run through these rafts of brine flies, and they all stir up, and they just snap them up with their beak. They just literally run through with their mouth open and just eat as many flies as they can. And then, sometimes they'll even flap their wings to get them to fly up some more. So I had taken some pictures of them last year, and I thought, wouldn't it be awesome to get one running straight at you with its mouth open like that? Like, that would just be amazing, right? Like,
Yeah.
how would you even get that shot?
Yeah. It's crazy.
And then
And
this year I was taking, go ahead.
I was going to say it's crazy because I feel like yucky. Like I feel like I'm in there with you
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's so like intimate and there's so many bugs. I feel like they're crawling
Yeah.
on me.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, that's real. Yeah. I'm glad that it gives you that feeling, because that's exactly, what it was like. So I was actually shooting phalaropes, and they're picking off the flies that are on the surface of the water. So they're kind of milling around, and I was, laying in this, field of flies and in the mud. And I turned around, and I had kind of some rocks, that were disguising me a little bit. And this guy came right around the corner behind those rocks and didn't see me. And I was like, oh no, it's happening. I was like so slowly just turned my camera, like trying to like just please focus on the eye, because they're so thick that they
Hmm.
obscure the eye, right? So
Yep.
the flies are so thick that you really have a hard time keeping focus on the bird, because it just turns black. And so he didn't see me, or he didn't care, one of the two, I don't know, but he just came running right at me with that mouth wide open. And I had managed to have like decent settings and locked on focus before he came, and I got a few good frames out of it. This is a full frame.
Wow.
I think I cropped like a tiny bit off the edge. But yeah, he was right next to me. And then he kind of, stopped for a second and looked at me and did a little hop, and then, flew to the other side of me and just kept going. So it was a fun encounter.
Do you use
But yeah,
that?
it's super gross. It's like not nice.
Yeah. Do you use that eye focus tracking for this shot?
I did, yeah.
Okay. And I from what I'm hearing from R5 users, I assume R6 is very similar, that it works very, very well.
It does. It works pretty well. It doesn't, I mean, it'll miss, you'll get like two shots that are perfect focus, and then two that aren't, and then it'll find it again. And there's two good ones and two that
Yeah.
aren't. But then if you're, ripping along at 20 frames per second, usually you get a few.
There you go.
So,
All right.
which is what I did. I was just like mashing on the shutter button, like, please.
So I saved the last three. I always try to put my favorite three at the end. So I'm going to take you through the three that I thought were most interesting or different, or just for whatever reason I loved. So this is so unique because I don't see a lot of this. I don't want to say I've never seen it, but I can't remember the last time I saw an image that had the same feel that these lights do. And it almost feels urban to me. So this almost feels like you'll see some people that do these urban wildlife, and they've got city lights way off in the distance to create these bokeh kind of balls in the background. And it had that vibe to it. What are the light sources for these lights?
So this is at the Great Salt Lake again. I'm out on the Causeway toward Antelope Island, looking in toward the city. So it's the city on the shores of the Great Salt Lake. It's kind of a continuous city. It goes from Salt Lake to like Farmington, and then Ogden. And I think these lights are probably somewhere in like Farmington, but it's basically one continuous corridor of city. So they're very far away. They're probably 7 miles off, and I think that's what gives them that sort of there's atmospheric distortion in there,
Hmm.
which is why they don't look, why they look the way they do. You almost see like a rainbow in some of them, and I think that's just the light diffracting through all the atmosphere, because I'm right at the surface of the water. So it does give it a really cool effect to have them that far off. And this was something that You don't get the conditions for all that often. If there's any pollution in the air, you can't really see the lights. They fade out too quick,
Hmm.
you know. So it has to be really clear, and the water has to be really still. You know, everything has to be just right. So it was just a lucky opportunity. Um, yeah, I was
Really
pretty
good.
happy
Yeah,
with
really,
the
really good.
shot. Yeah.
Um, Editing. So take me through an image like this, and I know it probably varies. What would you say your skill level is in things like Photoshop or Lightroom, and how much time on average would you say you spend on an image?
I spend a lot of time thinking about images, and I'll often go to Lightroom and I'll mess around with it, and I'll be like, I don't know where to take this, and then I'll forget about it. So I'll spend a lot of time just like thinking about it, but actual hands-on time doing editing is maybe 5 minutes
Okay.
per photo. Once I know what direction I want it to be and I know how I want it to look, I really don't spend a lot of time. So I'll think around and then discard and, you know, just reset over and over. But this one, it was basically, you know, like I dropped the blacks and I increased the whites, and uh, that was about it. I leveled it, you
Hmm.
know, all Lightroom. I don't think I did anything. No, actually, I think I did a little cloning in Photoshop. There was like a reflection on the bottom that I thought was distracting,
Okay.
and I cloned that out.
Okay.
That's about what I typically do.
Okay.
I often don't clone things out that other people tell me you should clone that out, as distracting, and I often just, they don't bother me, or I think they're part of the story, and so I leave them in, like all the bugs and little dots and
Yeah.
things in
Yeah.
the
Yeah. I'm
pictures.
yeah, I'm
Um,
I'm a cloner outer of little bugs. I try, like, if there's a bug on a bird, like a tick. I know for some people that's like, oh, it's part of the
oh,
story, you know. This I'm like, nah, I just can't do it. And there's no, listen, there's
yeah,
absolutely no judgment either way. I don't like to be judged for doing that, to be honest. And I certainly don't judge people that leave it in and say like, oh, you should have taken that out, or I don't think that's right. I think everybody just has to kind
yeah,
of figure out what's right. I think conservation photographers tend to, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about this. They tend to edit a little bit lighter because I think in their
yeah,
mind they tend to want to stay truer to what the camera captured at the moment of time. Of course, with the
yeah,
understanding that the camera never captures what your eye sees, and some editing should be done probably on every image, regardless of what type of photographer you are. But I do think that there's
yeah.
a stereotype that conservation photographers edit lighter, and quote unquote like fine art type photographers may edit a little heavier. So, all right, let me get into
Yeah,
this.
I agree with that. There's more like a photojournalistic approach, but I also think that, you know, there is value in, so I kind of like to approach this almost fantasy like type of, you know, images. And I don't, they're not fantasy, but I want them to be fantastical.
Hmm.
And so they really did happen, and almost everything is in camera. But if I, you know, um, I feel like it automatically kind of takes it out of that photojournalism realm and into a different realm of like art. And so I feel a little more free, although still I don't do much. Like this one, I think I leveled it and I messed with, you know, curves and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
I did not do much.
this one is
Very standard Lightroom edits.
this one's so good. This one is so good.
Thank you.
This is so good. So
Thanks, Scott.
getting them in that little sliver of light, is that, are you changing your perspective, or are you just kind of hoping it happens? Like, I guess what I'm asking is, are you seeing it happen consciously, or are you getting home and saying, oh, that worked out really great?
No, no, this was a stripe, and I was like, I'm gonna get him in the stripe. Like that
Okay.
was my plan, right? They moved around, they walked up and down, and at other times, you know, the mountains came down and there was no stripe. But when they walked into that zone, I was like, ooh, I can get him in the stripe. So, um, yeah, it was like a kind of like a feat of core strength that I didn't really have to like keep the camera right at the exact height. You know, this is one of the problems with never using a tripod. Sometimes you're just like, I can't do it anymore. But yeah, they were walking along, and you know, in the background is a hill that's black, and in the foreground it's mud, and obviously the water is reflecting, you know, sunlight from the sky, and that's what the white stripe is. And so, yeah, this was very intentionally putting them in the stripe, and I wasn't sure, you know, if having them at the top I tried to like put them at the top and in the middle and at the bottom.
Hmm.
And of course, when I got home, I was like, oh, the top is the way. Like
Yeah.
that's the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was intentional.
Yeah. So when we talk about like composition with this image, there's a lot going on. It's interesting because sometimes I'll talk about you can compose within a composition. I don't really have a I don't have a great way to illustrate this. Let me see here. I may have. I don't know if this is going to work. No, it's not. It's definitely not going to work. Okay, it might work. Okay, I was able to bring up a whiteboard real quick. If you take out this, right? So you take out that bottom of the frame, and then you recompose this in thirds, there, and roughly here. It kind of falls back into rule of thirds, and they become composed on the lower rule of thirds again. But the way you compose them originally is at the top, and I just think it's really, I don't know why I found it interesting with that one. I loved the composition here. A lot of people typically will compose their subjects on the bottom third because it feels like they're too high in the frame. But I think it's an exceptional usage of composition, knowing that that black area at the bottom of the frame almost recomposes the birds again and puts them right back into more of a standard composition. So I thought it was really interesting, and really, really well done. And the poses are beautiful. That little color of light that's there, so it's kind of got this cool feel with this little bit of warmth that just runs right through the birds. It's an exceptional image. So really, really well done. You tell I
Thank
like
you. I'm
that one.
glad you like it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
you
a
could.
fun night. Those two were courting, and they they kind of walked all over together a little bit, like um, mimicking each other and doing their little fun preening ritual. And I got a lot of shots actually of those too. And I actually photographed them actually mating, but of course the male was on top of the female, and then his head was up in that dark band, and I didn't get up high enough, quick enough to capture it, so his head's cut off in the black, and so the pictures
I gotta be
are no
honest.
good. But anyway, it was fun to see.
So this is just me being weird, but I don't find mating. I find courtship incredibly beautiful in wildlife. Actual copulation isn't so beautiful to capture for art. I can't, like, I see people posting like elk recently because we just had the rut in Pennsylvania. There's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's nothing beautiful about this event, and
Yeah.
I don't want to see it on my wall. Be honest. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's not a wall hanger.
no,
But what is beautiful with these two is not necessarily the mating, because that's like 2 seconds, right? But afterward, they do this incredible thing
yes,
where they bring their heads up real high and they cross their necks and their beaks and they
yes,
walk together like that.
yes.
And that I did not well, I captured it, but again, they've got their heads up
It's up too
and
high.
they're just cut off
Yeah,
in the black band. And so I would watch for that next time. Like, I'd be ready.
yeah, yeah. Courtship behavior is interesting.
May I got it.
In ducks, I've seen some really interesting. Again, you lay there long enough, and you start to see just the behavior, and it can be really really interesting. I don't want to bore everybody with a story, but I was watching these mergansers, and I couldn't figure out what exactly was happening until I realized it was part of this ritual that they were doing, where the female just laid out and put her head flat on the water for like a minute or two,
Yeah,
and it was I had never seen it before, and then the male started to circle and like swim around her, and then
yeah,
again, like you said, the actual act took about 2 seconds, but it was just that
yeah,
moment before that it was like really 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 beautiful. Anyway, let me get back to this last image. This
yeah.
is I marked this as my favorite. It's also, I thought, kind of like, I don't know, like your signature work to me. Like it was just kind of like, yeah, if I had to pick one, if somebody said, okay, show me one image and tell me who this photographer is in one image, it might be this one. So this looks like a grebe.
Yep.
Okay.
That is an eared grebe. So these are some of my favorite birds. These birds come here by the millions. I think in some years we get as many as 2 million at the Great Salt Lake. And they are highly dependent on the lake for their survival. So most of the other saline lakes in the West have dwindled to the point where, they don't support many birds anymore. In the Great Salt Lake's the only one that's left. And so they almost all come here. They're considered, a species of least concern, but they are very vulnerable because they, something like 70% of the world's population of them relies on the Great Salt Lake. So they're here and they're fun and they're super friendly and they've got a ton of personality. And they're really fun to photograph. They actually lose their flight muscles for something like 2 or 3 months, up to 3 months. And of course, the grebes, they don't walk very well. So that means that once they land in the Great Salt Lake, until they gain enough weight to put their flight muscles back on, they're here and they're not going anywhere. And so, it's so endearing to me to see these guys, out there in this vast lake, and just to know that, like, this is where they are and they're not going anywhere until they eat, their quota of like 45 million brine shrimp that it takes to get them, fat enough to lift off again, or strong enough to lift off. So I'm glad that you like this photo. This was a particular day when I went out and I was like, it's glorious, the clouds, the sky, the light. It was incredible. And I was like, no birds, none, nowhere. Like, I couldn't see anything. And then, at one point I was like, wait, are those birds? Right? Like, I had to look at them with the binoculars. I was like, they are, it's grebes. Oh, I'll save my day. And so I'm like cruising up the shoreline trying to get, a closer vantage. And I found a spot that I really thought, showed them off well. But they were still just specks, and I was just lucky that they kind of came toward me, and this is as close as they got, and I got a few really good frames. I didn't get many from that day, but they're some of my favorite photos. So
Yeah.
grebes saved the day.
Yeah, really, really amazing. I just love it. I remember messaging you once. I don't know if you remember this, but it was like, I see names, and I follow a lot of people. I look at birds all day, so it's all I do. So and I saw these images, and sometimes you see somebody getting better, right? And you're like, okay, yeah, they got lucky, right? I mean, it happens. I get lucky sometimes. I don't mean to take a great shot. I take a good shot, and then I'm like, yeah, that's something's going on here. This, like, she got really good. Do you remember me messaging you and being like, can I ask you how you got really, really good? Like, is something going on? And I remember you just kind of saying, look, yeah, I've been kind of working, and I have some mentorships, and I've been trying to like study a lot. But I just thought it was kind of funny that I picked up on it. Like, I could see it happening. And then I went back to your timeline, and you could see it. Like, you could just see the growth. So I just wanted to give you a lot of credit for that. It's been very impressive to watch you over the last year, and how good you've gotten, and how you've kind of had this great ability to create a style for yourself, and then also use these images to tell a very compelling story. And I've talked about this with several guests about how your best images typically come from your backyard, meaning the area that you live, because you get to really know it. Like, you talked about the light. I can remember the first time I went out to Utah, and I went out for golden hour. And so I get up at 6 in the morning or whatever, and I'm out there by the water, and I'm looking around like, where's the sun? Well, idiot me didn't realize that there's a giant mountain to the east. So there is no golden hour. You only get it, and you've mentioned this, you only get it at night.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Scott. That's really, that means a lot to me coming from you. Of course, I really admire your work. And so I really appreciate those words. Yeah, I do think that it helps when you have a place like the Great Salt Lake, right? I mean, this particular location, I think if I did anything, it was recognize that, like, this is different. This, like, I can get shots here that nobody else is really taking. And so just seeing that, and I think recognizing it was probably the most important thing. And then being like, all right, well, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to see how, let's see how deep it goes, right? Like, go down the rabbit hole with this one and see what you can do with it. So it's been a lot of fun.
It sounds like a lot of people are trying to come visit you in Utah soon in May, and they're asking for sleeping arrangements, and they want to know, will you be providing guided tours for them? So that's Bayou Josh, who has a great YouTube channel, by the way. So if you're not subscribed to that, I think Josh is going to be on my show soon, or we're going to do some collaborations together. But he's asking, so I think he's trying to get a spot. And
hi, Josh. Yeah. So my campaign is working. I wanted people to understand what a special place this is. I want people to come here and take beautiful photos. And then I want them to post them on the internet and make them go viral, and have people really upset that the Great Salt Lake is disappearing and that it's going away. Because I'm quite serious when I say that, this year I saw it in real time, it's disappearing, it's going away. And so if we don't do something really fast about it, it won't be available anymore for us or for the birds. And that's the worst part, right?
Yeah.
So yes, please, photographers, come take pictures and spread the word.
Couple practical questions about your photographing on the lake. So, do you ever get in the lake? I don't even know if you're allowed to be in the lake. So, some lakes you can just put on waders and get in, like fishermen, you'll see them in the water all the time. Do you physically get in
Yeah,
the water, or are you typically shooting from the flats along the sides of the water?
both. I mean, in the you have to be careful because there are places where there's mud that will literally swallow you up. Like you can't just walk around out there. It's next level, right? All of y'all who take pictures of birds know about marshes, but this is different, right? This is another notch on the on the marsh scale. Like there's quicksand. There's it's like next level smell. So yes, I am in the water at times. I haven't done it yet because it's been too hot, but I'm thinking I'm going to start going out I have a dry suit, and I'm going to start going out in a dry suit. But there's not a whole lot of public access spots. And so, and the lake is drying really rapidly. So it's like every time I go out there, it's a new place. Like I don't have, let's see, if I'm looking at the pictures that that I picked, it's like at least half of those you can't take pictures there anymore. They're mud, right? Like the picture in the background right now with the boots, that's what they look like now. So the pictures where I have those 6 ducks lined up, that's exactly where I shot these boots. Really is drying up in front of our eyes, and so yeah, it's a different landscape, and so it's hard for me to say, yeah, go out and do this, because I don't know. It's an experiment every time I go out.
Yeah. I tried to show people the boots, but I cut you off for half a second, so I apologize to people. But I think they got the messages that this is retreating. Now, I can't take up too much time with the giant conservation message. I do want to talk a little bit about it, though. I do want to point, let me
Yep.
reference this website. So this is Mary Ann's website. It's maryannekarren.com. You can see the spelling up there. I'll put a link in here. I don't have it there now on the live show, but it'll be there for the replay. There's a petition here that says take action for the Great Salt Lake, so you can find out more and sign the petition there. So I'm sure everybody would appreciate that. Is there without getting into the history of it, is there a best case scenario? So is there something that can actually be done to reverse this process, or is this just a natural process that the lake kind of ebbs and flows, and in some years it's good,
Yeah.
some years it's bad? What can actually be done to help?
Yeah. So the great news is almost all of the water the vast majority of the water that goes into the lake comes from the mountains that are immediately surrounding the lake. So the Wasatch Mountains, they're all contained within the state of Utah. And so there's not a lot of like compacts with other states. There aren't a ton of policy, there aren't a ton of agreements that cross state lines. There are not a lot of downstream users, right? The Great Salt Lake's a dead end and all the water goes there. And so it's really almost entirely within the power of the state of Utah to fix the problem. The reason that it's drying up is over diversion. So a lot of, like 80% of the human consumption is agriculture, and that's most of what's driving the decline. And so we need smart water policies that incentivize farmers to conserve water, to plant water, to plant crops that are better, that use less water. That sort of thing and give them incentives if they decide not to plant a crop this year, for example. I want to conserve water. I'm not going to plant my 4th alfalfa round or whatever. That water can then go back to the lake, because right now there's no way to give it back. There's no conservation path for water to go to the lake. If you conserve water, it just goes to the next water rights holder down the line, which might be for a golf course or something like that, right? So it's all policy. I would say, 10 years of drought is certainly not helping. It's accelerating the process, but really it's human caused. And, whether you want to talk about climate change or not, it's the problem with the Great Salt Lake is a human problem. And that's good news because, we can fix it with water policy. So I'm actually hopeful. And I hope that, if we make enough noise, the Utah legislature will take action.
Awesome. All right. Well, that was good because I wanted to know that there was at least a chance. Like you always want a chance. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes you look around and you're like, yeah, we got no chance on this issue. We got no chance on this issue. We've passed the tipping point on this. So at
Yeah.
least it sounds like there's something that we can be done
This
on
is
this
a
one.
water policy issue. We made all those policies. We can change them. So I think that the issue is just getting it done fast enough.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's urgent, and it needs to be made clear that it's urgent. So.
All right. All right. Well, before I sign off, I just want to say thank you for coming on. Loved the episode. Loved the images. Big fan. Loved the message around the Great Salt Lake, and I'm really really happy. I hope we get a lot of people to view this. I will push this heavily on my Instagram account, and I'm hoping that some of the people here, because we've got a lot of good people on the live audience, that when I promote it on Instagram, you guys make me a commitment that you will share some of this out, because I think there's a not just great images, which I always try to feature, but this one has a great message out there and a great cause as well. So thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. So much fun.
All right. All right. Well, I'm going to play a quick outro. Mary Anne, I'll ask you just to hang out. It might be a minute or two, so give me a little bit of time. You'll hear nothing, but then I'll come back and I'll join you on Skype after this, because I just wanted to thank you in person. And for everybody else that joined in tonight, thank you so much for joining in. I thought it was a great episode. I really hope I can get this out in the public, if nothing else, to promote just that intro piece and get some links to this website so that we can get a little bit more awareness. I think it's good to spread some conservation messages and mix them in. I think one of the things I've tried to do over the last 2 or 3 years is say, if I'm able to put out pretty pictures and draw people in with pretty pictures, can I mix in some positive messages in here as well? Can we mix in a little bit of conservation? And I don't consider myself a conservation photographer, but can I at least try to get a little bit out there? And then can I use a platform to showcase others who do it much better than I do? So hopefully this found you well tonight. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in to another live episode of Wildlife Inspired. If you're not a subscriber, you're going to want to make sure you hit the subscribe button now. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. I love to hear it. Now, you can find me on my social media contacts down here at SKeysImages and on my website, skeysimages.com. If you enjoy the content, you're also going to want to check out patreon.com/wildlifeinspired, my subscription site where I take you in the field and behind the scenes, and I offer lots of editing advice in both Lightroom and Photoshop. I also have videos there that are archived only for Patreon subscribers. I do want to thank you for your ongoing support, and I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.